This is a story of an intern who created the NFL's newest dynasty. Let's go back to the year 2004 in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As many NFL teams do, the Eagles brought in a bunch of interns to aid the current coaching regime, led by future Hall of Fame coach Andy Reid. Little did Reid know, but one of his interns, a former running back and wide receiver at the University of Delaware, would change the trajectory of his career forever. That intern and current GM is Brett Veach. To refresh your memory, Andy Reid was hired by the Eagles in 1999 and was the second youngest head coach behind John Gruden at the time. Reid took the Eagles to 4 consecutive NFC Championship games between 2001 and 2004. Our story starts right after Reid finally made his first Super Bowl appearance, but ultimately falling to the New England Patriots 24-21. Reid ultimately could not get back to the Super Bowl with the Eagles, and he was never able to find the quarterback to bring him a championship and to bring Philly that championship. At the end of the 2012 season, the Eagles chose not to renew Andy Reid's contract, ultimately allowing him to hit free agency. A coach of Reid's caliber had teams lining up for his services, which ultimately led Andy to Kansas City. But first, let's get back to Brett and why he's important. After 4 years of interning, in 2008, Veach was promoted to coaching assistant. 2 years later, promoted to scout. After Andy Reid was relieved of his duties in Philadelphia, Veach had made enough of an impact for Andy to bring him with him to Kansas City, ultimately making Veach co-director of player personnel. This authority and influence on the front office and head coach gave Veach the opportunity to vouch for a 3-star recruit who was currently a freshman at Texas Tech. And yes, that freshman was Patrick Mahomes. In an SI article, Reid has been quoted referencing a conversation between him and Brett Veach. Quote, "You're not going to believe this quarterback. This guy is unbelievable. The best I've ever seen." End quote. Despite making the playoffs 4 of the last 5 years in Kansas City and a resurgence from Alex Smith, the Chiefs acted on Veach's recommendation. They traded up to the 10th pick and drafted Mahomes in 2017. For most, this was a defining moment for the start of what would be considered the Chiefs dynasty.
Isn't that crazy? How many teams, draft a quarterback after they make the playoffs? But even more, Matt, think about this. How many trade up into the top 10 after making the playoffs to draft a quarterback to replace a guy? Wild.
Well, and I think that exactly goes into what we've talked about for 3 years and more or less in the last year, right? We have really looked at what makes teams successful and what makes teams not successful. And when you look at what teams are doing that, the Chiefs, the Packers, an attempt by San Francisco that failed, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we really break it down, the best teams do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, how many teams do we see at the top of the draft every single year, consistently, year after year, run out these young quarterbacks that have no business playing in the league, right? Like Atlanta for this year, for the sake of example, they're going to go out there, probably draft another one this year and run into the same issue, not give their guy enough time to develop behind a veteran quarterback. And more importantly, we just don't see teams in the league right now have the foresight and honestly the balls to do something like Green Bay did, right? We have a future Hall of Fame quarterback, back-to-back MVP. We're in the NFC Championship game, but hey, we see a guy that we know we can draft and develop that could push us across the line in a couple of years. And obviously, we'll get more to the story here, but it worked out for Kansas City too.
Well, and I'd argue that was big for Kansas City. Drafting Mahomes is what we know is the narrative changer for this dynasty. But to me, it really wasn't the draft pick of Mahomes as the cementing piece to this entire dynasty. It goes hand in hand. But for me, it was actually something that happened a little bit later in 2017. That summer, they decided to relieve John Dorsey of the general manager title, which again, to our narrative, I had always thought Dorsey was the guy to take Mahomes. But shortly after, Brett Veach was awarded the job of general manager. And as we kind of talked about earlier, he was the one to scout Mahomes. He was the one to push for Mahomes. The Chiefs decided to tie their new quarterback with their new GM, and thus started the dynasty that we currently have as the Kansas City Chiefs. As Alex Smith's final year in Kansas City came to an end, the Philadelphia Eagles upset the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl, winning the breakup with them and Reid for the time being. Going into 2018, it would be Mahomes' first year as a starter. Vegas, not impressed, had their line at 8.5 wins. Veach's key offseason additions included Sammy Watkins, Chad Henne, and Damian Williams. They finished the year 12-4. Yeah, there you go, Vegas, with the number one offense in the league. Kelce, Tyreek Hill, and Mahomes all making all-pro selections. While the Chiefs were led by a stout offense, they had only one defender make the Pro Bowl. That was Dee Ford, and we'll get back to him. The Chiefs exceeded all preseason expectations, got the number one seed, and ended up in the AFC Championship game, where Mahomes led a touchdown drive to give the Chiefs the lead with only 1 minute remaining before disaster struck. Brady throws an interception, but there goes Dee Ford. He lines up offsides, and the play is called back, giving Brady another shot. And at this point in time, you know how the story ends. Brady, of course, does what Brady always did and won the game, leading the Patriots to their third straight Super Bowl.
Isn't that so ironic, man? This year, 2023, Kansas City fans, hey, they must have forgotten, bro. They must have forgotten that games are decided by offsides penalties, right? It's funny how people forget, but...
Well, and how the narrative changes, right? Entering the 2019 offseason, Veach had an amazing opportunity. A star quarterback on a rookie contract. He had to bolster the defense, and he had to move on from Dee Ford. They traded Ford to San Francisco, saving $15 million in cap space, allowing them to sign Pro Bowler Tyrann Mathieu, Rashad Breeland, and Alex Okafor to help shore up this defense. And they did, improving their defense to 7th in the NFL. The Chiefs ended up repeating as the number one seed, but faced unprecedented adversity in the playoffs. The Chiefs trailed in all 3 of their playoff games, down 24-0 against Houston in the divisional round, ultimately winning that game 51-31. And for me, that is one of the most remarkable games I remember as a football fan, as a sports fan. A great game. Down 17-7 to Tennessee in the AFC Championship game, going on to win 35-24. And finally, trailing 20-10 to the San Francisco 49ers in the Super Bowl, only to go and score 21 straight points, which led them to their first title in the Mahomes-Veach era. 14 years after being hired by Andy Reid as an intern, Veach delivers a championship to Reid. After 7 championship games and 2 Super Bowl appearances, Andy Reid finally cements himself as a Hall of Fame caliber head coach. Now that the ultimate goal has been achieved, Veach turns his focus to cementing the dynasty, signing both Mahomes and Chris Jones, the leaders on offense and defense, to long-term extensions. The question now facing the Chiefs is, how do you win with a massive quarterback contract? Well, we know the answer. The Chiefs found themselves in yet another Super Bowl, but their identity had been exposed, scoring only 9 points. Mahomes was sacked 3 times, he threw 2 interceptions, and they had 11 team penalties for the Chiefs overall. These numbers did not tell the whole story. The offensive line was in shambles, and Mahomes, frankly, was running for his life. When evaluating the only game that really matters in the 2020 season, it was clear that the time for a complete change in identity and retool to help move this team forward was absolutely necessary.
Yeah, for sure, man. And isn't it super interesting that Pat Mahomes and Tom Brady have such similar career paths to start their careers? And it's funny that all this is starting to change right after Mahomes loses to Brady in the Super Bowl. And what I mean by that is Belichick needed to get over the hump before he had Tom Brady, right? He had lost the Super Bowl against the Packers, had a lot of struggles in Cleveland and other spots. And then also, both teams needed to get into an identity change. Now, Brady's was a little different, right? Because they had a good defense to start. But Mahomes and that offense looked bad in that Super Bowl.
Well, I find it interesting that you're absolutely right, A, and B, that they're just so different, right? Mahomes had the elite wide receiver. He had the tight end. He has the tight end now. And we're seeing this transition as we continue along with this story. And as most of us know where the story lays today, that it's going to have to be the defense as this team continues. And we start to see that start playing out right in front of our eyes within this story.
Yep. And then we saw Tom Brady literally go from defense to, let's just go get Randy Moss, right? Crazy.
For pennies on the
let's just
dollar.
go get Randy Moss. Huh? Guys, he's whatever.
Thinking back to the biggest detractor in the 2020 season, it was clearly the offensive line. We highlighted the key pieces in that Super Bowl, and if you watched it, you saw it for yourself. The offensive line was an absolute liability. So Veach going into the 2021 offseason had to make changes, and he did so, trading 3 picks for Pro Bowl left tackle Orlando Brown, signing guard Joe Thuney, and drafting Creed Humphreys and right guard Trey Smith. Offensive line, check. The Chiefs added Nick Bolton to round out a stellar 2021 class and adding yet another starter to help in the linebacking core. 2021 was an opportunity to get the high-powered offense back on track. With a better offensive line and additions to the defense, the Chiefs ultimately went on to go 12-5. Sadly, the 2021 season did not go any further. After the Chiefs' lack of run game finally seemed to catch up with them, Joe Burrow and the Bengals handed them a playoff loss, 27-24 in overtime. The 2022 offseason was a make-or-break period in the dynasty. Their star wide receiver was asking for a record-setting contract as the wide receiver market exploded. And from the level of play that Tyreek Hill showed on the field, absolutely deserved. Only recently did it come out that Tyreek and his agent had hoped to hold leverage on the Chiefs and ultimately have them fold to his demands. But that is not how our story plays out. Hill was ultimately traded to Miami for a haul of draft picks and signed a 4-year, $120 million contract with Miami. With Hill now gone, the Chiefs did what they could to replace him, adding Marquez Valdes-Scantling from Green Bay on a free agent contract, as well as bringing in Juju Smith-Schuster from Pittsburgh also as a free agent. The offense would now ultimately fall on the connection between Mahomes and Kelce. Another key piece of the Chiefs' success up to that point had been Tyrann Mathieu, who was entering free agency as well. It would have been very easy for Veach to take the safe route to bring Mathieu back, but he had decided that there were concerns in the run game and with his aggressive coverage style. Veach decided to take a risk on a young safety named Justin Reid, a very talented safety from Houston, but had also been held back due to injuries, missing 3 games in each of the last 2 seasons. Justin would go on to start all but 1 game over the 2022 and 2023 seasons. And this leads us to the 2022 draft class, where in the 7th round, the Chiefs selected maybe the most important pick outside of Mahomes in this story, Isaiah Pacheco. Well, Pacheco doesn't leave you in awe of his stat line. He delivers consistency and sets the tempo on every play. Reliable, something the Chiefs desperately needed. Veach added 2 additional key starters in the 2022 class, with Trent McDuffie, cornerback, and defensive end George Karlaftis, both playing big roles for Kansas City in 22 and 23. Heading into the 2022 season, expectations were lower than years past after the departure of Tyreek Hill, but the league still knew Mahomes and Reid were to be feared. Defeating the Jacksonville Jaguars and finding revenge against the Cincinnati Bengals, Mahomes and Kelce led Kansas City to its 3rd Super Bowl, this time against Andy Reid's former team, the Philadelphia Eagles. In come-from-behind fashion, the Chiefs and Reid knocked off his former team 38-35 in a win that left the NFL world asking, do we have the next greatest of all time? Coming into the 2023 season, the Chiefs had the luxury of bringing back almost all of their starters. The only roadblock would be their defensive anchor, Chris Jones, and his desire for a long-term contract. After a disappointing Week 1 performance against the Lions, Veach once again answered the most crucial need by signing Jones to a 1-year extension and paying the man. It's Super Bowl week. Kansas City has made its 4th Super Bowl in 5 years. While the story is not yet finished, it's safe to say a dynasty has in fact been born. All starting 20 years ago when an intern stepped into the facilities in Philadelphia.